So thank you very much. And you're all very welcome to this, which I believe is the 10th meeting of our College of Psychiatrists of Ireland Evolution and Psychiatry Special Interest Group. We're now 3 years in existence, and our other videos can be viewed on the playlist, the Evolution and Psychiatry playlist of the College of Psychiatrists of Ireland YouTube channel. I'd like to thank Helen Murray, as always, for organising today's meeting. And I would like to welcome our very special guest. We're very honoured to have Rick Coste joining us from a very snowy New Hampshire. And I came across Rick's podcast just over the last 6 months or so. So I kind of feel like I know the tone of his voice and the way he thinks at this stage. So it's a great honour to meet him virtually in person. And Rick has created a really fantastic resource in terms of evolutionary science, thinking, the history of evolutionary thought, going back to the very beginning. I think there are over 140 episodes. They're nice 10, 15-minute bite-sized episodes, which I would highly recommend, available on Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts, to use that cliche. As I say, really honored that Rick was able to join us today. And what I was planning to do was have just a general discussion with Rick, first of all, about evolution and how he got to the point of creating his podcast and subsequent book. And then Rick is also going to talk to us a little bit more specifically about evolution and psychology, just briefly from his perspective. Okay, so welcome, Rick.
Yeah, thank you very much. And, thank you for having me. It's really an honor, and hello, everybody who happened to join the call today. So, it was funny when Professor O'Connell reached out to me, and I looked back over all the episodes that I'd already created on the podcast. I didn't realize that I did not have one about, evolutionary psychiatry. I had one on evolutionary psychology that I did maybe 100 episodes ago, and it just blows my mind to think there's that many episodes and that I actually have that much to talk about. So I did today put together a brief presentation for my thoughts on evolutionary psychiatry, which is very basic. I'm more of a generalist, and my goal with the podcast and pretty much anything I do, but specifically with the podcast, is really to educate and to educate folks who maybe want to learn more about evolution, want to understand what it's about. And it's even the podcast itself and hopefully the book too. But I do know the podcast is being used in universities around the world, which is very humbling to think that it's made its way into some of the syllabus that some of the universities are using. So yeah, so what I would like to do is almost use you as a testing ground for a future podcast that I'm planning on evolutionary psychiatry. So that's the presentation that I did put together will eventually make its way into one of the episodes that I'm hoping to publish in the next probably next couple of weeks. So this was very, very timely, and I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Rick. And could you tell us just from the outset then a little bit about your own career to date and what got you interested in this whole area?
Yeah, so I came into the interest in evolution in a way that I think is probably not typical. It wasn't something I was interested in during my academic career. It was more later in life. I actually came to it by way of intelligent design, and I had heard in intelligent design. I'm sure you're fully aware of what intelligent design is, but it's really taking the creationist standpoint and wrapping it up with a new bow called intelligent design. And it interested me. So I did some reading on it, read Professor Michael Behe's book on intelligent design. This was years ago. After reading that, it interested me enough to want to know, okay, well, this makes sense to me, but I need to know more about evolution to understand, what exactly the intelligent design folks are trying to come at it. How are they trying to get at it? So that led me to Richard Dawkins' books, and read everything by Richard Dawkins, Stephen Jay Gould, and pretty much I consumed any book I could find on evolution. If you could see my library upstairs, that's all it is. So I was completely, I would say, enamored by the concept and the theory of evolution by natural selection. It surprised me how simple the theory is, and how once you understand it, how you can apply it to really anything uh, outside of nature, even technology, even marketing, even social media. You can apply evolution by natural selection, the concepts to pretty much anything. And that's so after a few years of study, and fortunately podcasting came out, and podcasting started, it really started around 2005. I discovered it on my own around 2010, 2011, when I started listening to podcasts by other folks. And I do have a background in audio, from being a kind of a struggling musician back in the 90s, so I do understand the concepts of microphones and everything. I thought, well, I could try this podcasting thing out. So I did. In 2012, I launched my first podcast, which was about philosophy, which is another topic that I've always been interested in. And that kind of got my feet wet. I got familiar with talking in front, talking into a microphone, talking to people that I can't see. And in 2014, my real goal was to eventually launch a podcast in evolution. And I figured it would be a short podcast, maybe a short series of maybe 25 episodes. I had some ideas of what I wanted to talk about and what I wanted to teach folks. Little did I know that the show was going to take off, and here we are 10 years later, and I'm still doing the show. Not weekly. I was doing it weekly for quite a few years, and now it's twice a month is I try to put an episode out. The book based on the podcast was published in October 2022 by Prometheus Books, which was exciting for me also to have. I had an agent, was able to find a publisher, and so we also have a book that supplements the podcast.
Okay, great. Yeah, yeah. And your academic career leading up to this, then, what area did you work in, or did you graduate in?
Yeah, so my academic career was English. I was working towards a degree in English, and most of my career outside of school, it was in IT. So I've been in IT for the last couple of decades.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay. And could you tell us then, how has the podcast been going? I know it's been going on a long time, and it's probably, if you'll pardon the pun, it's probably evolved over time. But and the book, what sort of feedback are you getting? What sort of coverage do you get?
Yes, so the feedback has been wonderful, and that's really what keeps the show going, is the feedback that I receive, because it's not something you can get rich off of. You won't make money on a podcast,
Yeah.
unless you're a movie star or somebody who happens to talk into a mic and put it out there. But the feedback has been excellent. I do receive emails quite often from folks around the world who have questions or will thank me for the show. Um, some folks are struggling with the concept of evolution, and that could be because of their religious background, and some folks do struggle with the concept of evolution, and when they've written to me, there have been folks who have told me that the show has helped them and reconcile the two, reconcile their religious beliefs as and connecting to evolution and natural selection, and that they can be compatible, as Stephen Jay Gould once said quite a while ago, with non-overlapping magisteria.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And where to next then for the podcast and for you in this journey with evolution?
Yeah, my plan is to keep the show going. I am hoping to get some funding to help with the costs of the show. As as time goes on, it does get a little bit more expensive with the production and the production values. But that's my goal with this is to keep going. I would like to work at some point with the National Center of Science Education here in the U.S. I have talked to them. I've actually had a couple of their folks on the show at different times over the past 140 episodes. And I did have a conversation with them last spring, which I would like to pick up again to see how I can help spread science education specifically around evolution with their help. And that's their focus is on schools and getting the education out there about evolution by natural selection.
Okay. And this would be high schools or middle schools in the US?
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that's very interesting. And do you see obstacles to that in the US, say, that you might not see maybe in Europe or other parts of the world, or um,
Yes,
is
yeah,
it?
there are pockets in the U.S. Areas of the country which are opposed to having this taught in schools, and they, there are areas that do want. They'll say, you know, talk about the other side meaning intelligent design. So
Okay.
there are areas of the country that are opposed to it. There are certain states that have are trying to put bills in place to block the teaching of evolution by natural selection in the classroom, and that is one of the goals of the NCSC, is to raise awareness and also to to help stop those bills from going through, and to get more awareness on science and the importance of understanding this.
Okay. Great. So thank you for that. And as I said from the outset, I've really enjoyed your podcast, and I'd recommend it to anyone, whether they're a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or someone who is completely new to the area. I think you've done a great service to science in developing such an accessible resource as well. And it's very deeply researched, but presented in a very pleasant, accessible, light sort of a way. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you for that. That means a lot, because that was one of the struggles early on, was taking the concepts of evolution by natural selection and, like as you said, making them accessible, but also in an entertaining way. So it's not just me, as I'm going to be doing today, not just me talking into a microphone. I tried to supplement the material with, I've had voice artists in the past to join the show to bring the voice of Darwin to the listener, the voice of Emma Darwin, and other folks. And I also intersperse that with music and subtle sound effects. Try not to overdo that, but at least to make it more of a theater of the mind in a sense. There was one
hmm,
episode that I had, I believe it was episode 30, which was it was presented as an audio drama where I interviewed Charles Darwin. And that was a very fun show to do. And it was very well received. It still receives a lot of downloads. So proud of that one. If anyone has a chance, I would recommend checking that episode out.
yeah, great. Yeah. Of course, in terms of the American side of things as well, our group has been pointing out in recent weeks that Lincoln and Darwin, as I'm sure you know, were born on the very same day in um, 18 February 12th, 1809. So I wrote a letter to an Irish newspaper asking for an extra bank holiday in February. So I'm still
Nice.
waiting to hear back from whoever assigns bank holidays. Um,
Right. That's
but
perfect.
I think it's a remarkable coincidence all the same, considering the impact the two men had.
Yep,
Um,
that's an excellent point. Yes, absolutely.
yeah, and there was some overlap as well, obviously, in terms of Darwin's views as an abolitionist, and how his evolutionary thinking shed light on racist assumptions up until then. So they weren't unconnected really either, I think, in a way, in terms of their ideas.
Right. Yeah, you absolutely. That's absolutely correct.
So anyways, so moving on then to evolution and psychology, and maybe even evolution and psychiatry. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that then, Rick?
Yeah, absolutely. Would you like me to run through the
Yeah,
presentation as okay?
perfect.
So yeah, so
Yes.
happy to do that, because like I said, it's going to help me out to work through
Hmm.
this material for eventual podcast. So you can probably see hopefully you can all see my screen right now.
Yes.
Let me just make sure that I can run this correctly. All right. So you should see a slide pop up, says in brief evolutionary psychology.
Yes, got it. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So I'm just going to run through these, and so thank you for indulging me. So while, and like I said, I had done an episode on evolutionary psychology, I believe 100 episodes ago. So while traditional psychology, is all about the how of, the how our brain functions, evolutionary psychology digs into, the why. And it's like looking at your brain as a super complex computer that's been programmed over millennia to deal with, all sorts of stuff, thanks to our friend natural selection. Yeah, if you've ever scratched your nose or scratched an itch without thinking, that's your brain pretty much running on autopilot. It's solving problems like our ancient ancestors did. So we're going to explore, or really briefly touch upon, how these old school solutions still shape our actions today as it relates to evolutionary psychiatry. So just like your phone runs apps without you knowing all the coding that's behind that, your brain is also running complex programs that are shaped by evolution. So this autopilot is really our legacy. It's the same one that helped our ancestors avoid becoming another animal's dinner. So, as we scratch the surface of evolutionary psychology, we can connect, these dots to something even deeper, and that leads us to evolutionary psychiatry. So evolution of human software. So, okay, so moving on to how our brains have evolved, think of our brains programming like software updates over the eons. Initially, our ancestors needed just the basics to survive and reproduce. But fast forward to today, and there have been quite a lot of lines of code and layers of code added to that, you know, added to the software. So, and it's not always pretty. Actually, it's a bit like, I don't, if anybody's a developer out there, if you've ever heard the term spaghetti code, it's a lot like where it's a bunch of spaghetti code now with bits and pieces added, removed, or even repurposed over time. And this, I would say, evolutionary trial and error has given us a complex blend of behaviors and reactions even, and which can seem pretty much out of place today. So it's not a stretch to say that our brains are using very outdated software, and it's like it's trying to run the latest applications. And just like an old computer would struggle with new software, our brains also have their hiccups while trying to do so. And evolutionary psychiatry, that can help us sort out some of the quote unquote bugs in the software from the features in this complex code. So if we want to dig a little bit deeper into evolutionary psychiatry, it's like the next level of understanding our brain's quirks. Is the way I like to look at it, and the way I like to explain it. While evolutionary psychology lays the groundwork, evolutionary psychiatry dives into the complexity of why we experience, or possibly why we experience, certain mental disorders. It's about seeking the origins of those lines of code that go back, way back to our ancestral past, to figure out the bugs in our system. They had a function at one time back then meaning millions of years ago, yet those threats and even the opportunities that the code was meant to address are no longer relevant today. So you can think of it like debugging the code while we try to understand why certain mental health issues exist by looking at the code present in our evolutionary software today. So imagine you're a developer and you're sifting through lines of legacy code, figuring out what's causing that unanticipated error message is what evolutionary psychiatry seeks to do. It seeks to understand those mental glitches that used to be survival features. And speaking of glitches, so they can feel pretty out of place in our modern world. When you look at it, those old bits of code, while they were relevant in a world of the very distant past, they don't quite match the world that we live in today. And this is where the concept of evolutionary mismatch theory comes in. So if you've ever felt out of sync with the world around you, and that's what this theory is all about. Our ancient brains are sometimes struggling to cope with today's fast-paced, I would say, uber-connected life. like when you feel anxious about maybe a nasty comment somebody says online, or related to a social media post or something that you may have tweeted at some point. That's your, when you see that and your reaction to it, that's your ancient alarm system kicking in. Whereas, our ancestors may have been on the alert for, say, saber-toothed tigers. That's obviously no longer the case. But that saber-toothed tiger is now morphed into a nasty Twitter comment, or I should say X comment. Now it's no longer Twitter. So this theory does help us understand why, some, I would say, modern issues might stem from our brains being, a bit outdated for today's environment. And this isn't the greatest analogy, but imagine that you're wearing a heavy winter coat because it's what your ancestors used to always wear, but now you're at the beach. That's evolutionary mismatch theory, kind of in a nutshell. Our brains sometimes react to modern life with a Stone Age approach. That's probably the best way I can put it. Now, with this in mind, we can turn our attention to something to see how traits that were, once handy for dodging those saber-toothed tigers, can make today's spreadsheets, actually a challenge for folks. So we can shift gears and look at ADHD, for example, and we can look at it from an evolutionary lens. So imagine that our hunter-gatherer ancestors, who were always on the lookout for food and always on the lookout for danger, they had to be really quick in having the ability to shift their attention, and being able to do so constantly could literally be a lifesaver for them. So you fast forward to today, and the traits that once helped us survive in the wild aren't always as handy in, say, a quiet classroom situation or a 9-to-5 office job, or really many of the situations we're in today. So when we talk about ADHD, we're really talking about, we could be talking about a set of ancient tools that just don't quite fit the modern world's requirements. So, if we were able to take a time machine back to our hunter-gatherer days, being easily distracted might mean you notice the tiger or that danger before it notices you. But today, not so much. I mean, it's like a radar, in a sense, that's looking for tigers in the supermarket that don't exist. But as we move away from ancient savannas and into the future, we can see how this understanding can shape the treatments that we employ tomorrow, using evolutionary psychiatry. So if we peek into the future of evolutionary psychiatry, it's like looking at almost like a crystal ball of mental health. And the field, it's not just about, in my opinion, it's not just about understanding our past. It's about trying to address those bugs to shape our future. And if we can come to grips with our evolutionary baggage that we've brought along, all that spaghetti code that I mentioned, scientists and therapists can find new paths in treating mental health. So if you can imagine a world where treatments are as unique as our DNA and as nuanced as, say, our personal history, all thanks to maybe the insights that we gain and the and from understanding our deep-rooted evolutionary traits. If our minds are, say, an old and faded map of the world, complete with, misshapen continents and sea serpents, evolutionary psychiatry can kind of serve as a GPS system, to guide us through to new destinations in mental health care. So it's really about, customizing the journey for everyone's, I would say, unique, mental landscape. So we are moving towards a time when mental health care is it can be as personalized as a tailored suit, even, fitting each person's individual evolutionary history. So it is worth exploring. So really, to wrap things up, diving into evolutionary psychiatry and evolutionary psychology as well isn't just academic. It's really a journey to the core of who we are, to our being, our innermost being. It helps offer insights that could transform how we approach mental health, by linking our present experiences, things we experience today, to our ancient past. We can gain a profound understanding of who we are and how we navigate our mental well-being, I would say, more effectively, especially than we have been. It's about turning those lessons from the past into a better future, a hope for a better future, ensuring that mental health care is natural and as essential as breathing. So, maybe the best we can hope for is that ability to navigate through that crazy spaghetti code of our mind and find ways to tweak the code and lead to better, mental health care. It's like we've been handed a family heirloom, and now we're learning how to polish it for the modern age. So, we can hope make a healthier future for everybody. So thank you, and thank you for indulging me.
Thank you, Rick. That was really excellent. I really enjoyed it, and I think you hit so many notes there that are very relevant to me, and I'm sure our group here as clinicians. You hit on a lot of very important principles, and I know it's maybe relatively new to you, but I think you really nailed it very well in how you summarized the key concepts. Um, I was just going to give just a very brief kind of summary of my own key principles in evolutionary psychiatry that might be of help to you, and then I'll shut up and open it up to the floor. Okay. So
Yeah, wonderful.
I think anyone interested in the field needs to read everything written by Randolph Nesse and a few others on the call here today, including Riyad Abed. And Randolph Nesse talks about 6 evolutionary reasons as to why we may become unwell mentally or physically. And he divides those 6 reasons into 3 pairs based on the fact that evolution is slow, evolution is an imperfect process, and evolution doesn't really care about our health or happiness. It's all about reproducing our genes. So the slow nature of evolution hinges around mismatch to a great extent, and that runs through a lot of evolutionary psychiatry thinking, and you've described that very well. He also talks about, he goes back to Tinbergen's principles of looking at traits and characteristics and how they've developed in individuals over lifespan, but also in us as a species, and how traits and characteristics may have particular adaptive purposes or not. He also talks about a social acronym for a more fully biopsychosocial assessment of individuals with mental health problems, looking at their social situation, their occupational status, their income, and their family, and so on. And I think overall, and this came through in your synopsis as well, the evolutionary perspective for me really leads to a much more nuanced and much more individualized and tailored, as you have said, approach to treating mental illness and looking at normal mental health in individuals as well. And ultimately, it's destigmatizing as well, because I think it reduces the categorical otherness of being mentally ill or not, and helps identify the fact that there, but for the grace of God, go any of us. Any of us can become mentally unwell if sufficiently stressed or traumatized, and the evolutionary perspective really guides you along that way of thinking. So the only cautionary note that I always mention is the idea of viewing disorders as adaptations. So the people we treat with severe mental health problems like schizophrenia, bipolar, when they're acutely unwell, those states are not really helpful or adaptive in any sense of that word. So in evolutionary psychiatry, we look at the systems or traits underlying these conditions that may go awry. So they may be mood and temperament or cognition, and we all vary on a spectrum in terms of these different traits and characteristics. And when someone becomes unwell, there may be a glitch, or there may be a stress or trauma that causes decompensation in one or more of these capacities. So that's just my summary, but I obviously I could go on, but I'd like to maybe open it up as well to questions from anyone else who's here. Would anyone else like to ask anything of Rick, or have you any comments to make?
Hi there,
Uh,
Henry. Can I jump in, or
Riyadh,
is there anyone
yes,
ahead of me?
jump away. You're first in line.
Okay, lovely. Okay, thank you very much, Rick. That was very interesting, and I think it would be a very useful introduction to many psychiatrists who are unfamiliar with evolution, and also to medical students, trainees, um, and so forth. So, I mean, you really put it in a very accessible way, and I'm sure that a lot of psychiatrists and a lot of doctors, who unfortunately, most of whom are not familiar with the benefits of evolution, will actually benefit from the way that you put it. And um, you've used the metaphor of software and hardware, and I think that those are useful metaphors. I just have a few comments, which I just want to make in sort of in terms of expanding the subject, especially of evolutionary mismatch, which is very close to my heart, because I think that evolutionary mismatch is one of the core concepts of evolutionary medicine and evolutionary psychiatry. I think it is very destigmatizing, and unfortunately, it's completely under researched. Um, the core concept of it is that normatively functional systems can produce dysfunctional outcomes. Now, that's something that I don't think that the majority of our colleagues actually have given much thought to. And because the automatic assumption is that dysfunctional outcomes are the result of broken brains or broken machines or broken biological systems. But the concept of mismatch raises this other possibility that normatively functional systems can produce dysfunctional outcomes. Mm. But there is a twist, though, there, which though that these normatively functional systems, which are producing dysfunctional outcome, can actually then, as a result of the stress of the mismatch, can develop biological dysfunctions. Mm. So, because mismatch, I mean, some mismatch at least, is a form of stress. And this, I mean, the system is operating outside the range for which it was designed, which is stressful. And that then can produce organic, biological, and actually broken systems. And I would suggest that there are a whole load of examples for this, such as the addictions. I would even say schizophrenia itself. I mean, I've written about models of schizophrenia as being at least partially due to mismatch. But certainly things like eating disorders. Eating disorders, once they become chronic, can actually, even though you might start with a normally or normatively functional system, then with the chronic state of eating disorder, you can actually end up with a markedly biologically deranged system. So that's one issue that I just wanted to highlight there. Another is the concept or the metaphor of software. Humans are they might be unique in the biological world by learning, whether it's social learning or cultural learning, being a large component of the software that we that we operate. And although I don't deny that culture exists in other species, it's nowhere near the extent or the importance that it is in humans. And this is I would say, a neglected area of research. I mean, it's more researched in anthropology and so forth, but I don't think there is much serious research about this in terms of the software, the software metaphor, and whether there are avenues of for therapy in that. So, I mean, I'm sorry for going on, but any response I would welcome to my ramblings.
I don't know if you saw me, but I was taking copious notes here
Yes,
while you were talking. So thank you for all of that.
Anyone else with any questions or comments? Just a second now. Apologies for not using the camera. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. A question for the speakers: is ADHD a mental illness or personality type? Is that what evolutionary theories of ADHD imply? ADHD, a syndrome that describes many things from neurodevelopmental disorders to personality disorders, organic, traumatic, all range of factors that are being diagnosed as ADHD, and if any comments on evolutionary aspects of ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, is their neuro profile more a mismatch or adaptation? Okay, there's a lot in that. I don't know, Rick, have you any comments on that, or ADHD and you mentioned ADHD yourself, of course.
Yeah, and I think the only comment I would make is, you know, are we saying it's a mental illness? And I would say no, based on at least my understanding and how I look at it, is going back to the analogy of code, which has been present for, you know, millions of years. Though that underlying code, also invoking evolutionary mismatch, could be part of the reason that we do see ADHD as prevalent as we do in, you know, in today's world, in today's environment. But it's very complicated, and I know even if there was a line of code, you know, if you could simplify it that much to being a line of code, there is so much more that goes into it than just, you know, a few lines of code that happens to still exist today and leads to ADHD. It's not as simple as that, obviously.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Okay, well, just to echo what Rhea said in terms of accessibility for what you've done here and in your podcast, you know, it's remarkable. And I think you might be surprised to know that most, if not all, well, I think medical schools and postgraduate training schemes for psychiatry or other areas have no acknowledgement of evolution, even though Dobzhansky's famous quotation, "Nothing in biology makes sense." We talk about it all the time in our circles, but there's no evolutionary education in undergrad or postgrad training. And oftentimes people will respond to evolutionary proposals or talks or lectures with, well, how is it going to help me in my clinic? And there may not be direct clinical applications all the time, but I would certainly argue, and lots of people here I'm sure would, that without the evolutionary perspective, you're missing, you know, really important parts of the picture in terms of humanity and mental health and mental illness. And there's all types of interventions that we can bring in, informed by an evolutionary perspective, that you wouldn't think of if you didn't have an evolutionary lens. So for example, with ADHD, there may be all types of changes in educational environments that could make a huge difference to kids. So, but I to echo what Rhea has said, I think what you have presented today, Rick, would be an excellent introduction for lots of our colleagues in terms of evolution and psychology and psychiatry. So thank you again.
There is a raised hand, Henry. I think Gurjot.
Gurjot, yes. Go ahead. You can unmute yourself, or can Helen unmute you?
Yep, I'm unmuted. Thank you. Thanks, Henry. And thanks, Rhea, for noticing the hand. Yep, no, Rick, I really enjoyed your presentation and taking the time to answer the questions that Henry was giving you at the beginning. I have a few things really, many of it is just kind of reiterating what's come before. Um, what Henry said, I think, we often get the question, um, from other psychiatrists that how does this help me in the clinic? What can I do practically? And it's something that, initially we used to struggle with, but I feel like now we've developed better answers to it. And I know from a purely anecdotal view that I feel like it does make me a better clinician. It reduces my burnout. It allows me to empathize with my patients and again, bring that humanity back. And also it gives you many more tools for explanations, especially when you're dealing with more than just a patient, like a family member, and that sort of thing. For me, I feel like it's revitalized my interest in psychiatry. I wouldn't say I was getting bored, but I was getting a bit disillusioned by the how things are progressing, and I find that it's quite prevalent amongst quite a few trainees. But then again, an interesting thing that you discussed that, evolution, it's the thing that struck you, Rick, at the beginning was that the theory, but by natural selection, it's very elegant. It kind of explains everything, and it can explain so many things, even outside of human biology. And then it made me think, is the theory too elegant? Is there a reflex nowadays to kind of rail against anything that provides, one kind of explanation for everything,
Right.
one unifying theory. So I'd like to hear if you have any kind of response to that. And then just to reiterate Riyad's initial point about how accessible your content is, it really is excellent, and I will be pointing all medical students and trainees towards your resources because they're already pressured with everything else. So to make it as accessible as possible is just really, really helpful. And then finally, I'd just like to plug the Substack that Henry and I have been publishing. I don't know if Rick knows, but I think many of the people.
I don't. So thank you.
We have 16 articles published now, and we have over 300 subscribers and 10,000 views. And there's a good mixture of interviews, clinical cases, and reviews of published articles. So, yeah, no, I would like to obviously have a article on you, Rick, if you'd be interested at some point, we could collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you wouldn't mind, could somebody pop that in the chat, to the Substack, link to the Substack?
Yes.
I'll pop it now.
I'll email you after, Rick. I'll send you
Oh,
an email with
perfect.
the link.
Even better.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks, Gurjat. So thank you again, Rick, and we'll draw this to a close. And we really appreciate your time, and hope you're not shoveling too much snow for the day over there in New Hampshire. And yeah, hope you get a thaw soon.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and it was great to meet you all.